the repeating death pattern. You've died before. Not once, not metaphorically, but again and again, across lifetimes, across dreams. And though the circumstances shift, the pattern never really changes. The details blur, but the rhythm remains. It ends the same way, the same final breath, the same goodbye, the same unfinished sentence. You wake up, not terrified, but familiar with death. This is the repeating death pattern, a phenomenon where the soul doesn't just experience death, but repeats it, caught in an echo loop that reverberates through the subconscious. You might notice it in dreams first. You're dying. Again. But it's not always violent. Sometimes it's slow. Sometimes you're watching it from outside your body. Sometimes you don't fight it at all. You just accept it. Not because you're resigned, but because you know the script. You've seen this scene before. Not just once, but dozens of times. And that's where the strangeness begins. You don't just die the same way. You feel the same things each time. The same regret, the same relief, the same final thought, the same moment of I should have said this, or I wasn't ready. And even in dreams, your soul tenses, not in fear, but in recognition. The deaths in past lives weren't random. They formed patterns. And those patterns become embedded in the soul. Not just as memory, but as emotional grooves. And unless they're seen, felt, and healed, they repeat, not just in dreams, but in behavior, in fear of endings, in avoidance of goodbyes, in chronic anxiety around change, closure, or loss. Because here's the paradox. Even though you've died countless times, the part of you that remembers still doesn't believe it knows how. The soul isn't afraid of death. It's afraid of dying the same way again. And dreams bring that forward, slowly, then all at once. You begin to notice recurring symbols, a bridge, a storm, a certain color, a certain word. Just before the dream death comes, those signs reappear. They're not just set pieces. They're codes, markers of a soul's unfinished exit. You may find yourself trying to change the ending in the dream. You speak what you never got to say. You run instead of freeze. You stay calm. Or sometimes, you simply hold presence as it happens. And when you wake up, you realize something in the pattern has softened. It's still there, but the edge is duller. The loop is loosening. This is not just dream work. This is soul repair. Because the way we die again and again imprints the way we live. If every life ends in betrayal, you might live this one distrusting love. If every ending came suddenly, you might live in perpetual fear of loss. If you were silenced, you might now speak too little or too much. The pattern doesn't die when the body does. It travels, and it waits, not to trap you, but to offer you a new way through it. So when you dream of your death, especially when it's the same death, wearing new clothes, don't turn away, don't dismiss it. Ask, what part of me still believes this is how it ends? Then listen, not with fear, but with compassion. And maybe this time, in dream or life, you'll choose differently. You'll say what needs to be said. You'll stay conscious through the last breath. You'll let the pattern complete, not through repetition, but through recognition. Because death, repeated unconsciously, becomes trauma. But death, met with awareness, becomes release. The misdirected awakening. You have a dream of awakening. Not just waking up from sleep, but waking up from everything. The illusion, the cycle, the false identities. In the dream, you know who you are. You feel clarity, like clean air after a storm. You see the fabric of reality, the threads that bind lives and lifetimes. You are awake in a way your waking self has never been. And then, something breaks. The moment collapses. You're pulled back. You open your eyes in bed, but the light is dull. The memory fades. The insight is gone. This is the misdirected awakening, a phenomenon where the soul touches transcendence in dream, but returns with no map, no proof, no clear next step. It leaves a mark. You walk through your day with that strange residue. Something almost happened. You almost remembered something important. You had it. The truth. The knowing. The door opened. But now it's closed again. And you can't explain why. These awakenings aren't false. They're real. But they come too soon. Too fast. Too disconnected from the structures your waking mind can hold. You taste freedom in the dream. Freedom from karma, from fear, from identity. You merge with light. You dissolve into presence. You feel yourself as everything. And then you return to a body that can't metabolize what just occurred. And that's the misdirection. Not because the awakening was wrong, but because it was out of sequence. The soul, in its hunger to remember, sometimes runs ahead of the self. Dreams become a testing ground, places where you can peek through the veil before you're ready to live what you've seen. It's not a mistake. It's a mercy, a preview. But when we take that glimpse and try to force it into the world, something breaks. You might try to explain it, share it, teach it. You speak of unity, of insight, of a moment where everything made sense, and the world looks at you blankly. Or worse, it celebrates you before you've even integrated what you touched. And so the awakening becomes performance, not presence. And this is where the trap forms. You start chasing the state, not the substance. You chase peak experiences, lucid dreams, doses of ecstasy. But the deeper clarity you once felt, brief, wordless, whole, stays just out of reach. You try to return to that dream, but it won't come back. Not because it's gone, because you tried to use it before it was ready to become you. The dream didn't lie to you. It invited you, but you misread the invitation. Awakening is not a switch. It's a slow burn. And the dream was never meant to make you enlightened overnight. It was meant to remind you of what's possible, of what's already inside, of what is waiting. If only you can learn to live it slowly, gently, truthfully. So what now? You stop chasing the dream. You stop trying to reclaim the moment. You ask instead, what part of that awakening can I embody right now in this small human form? Maybe just presence. Maybe just honesty. Maybe just breathing when things hurt. And in doing that, the misdirected awakening reorients. The insight begins to root. The light doesn't return all at once, but it flickers quietly through your kindness, your stillness, your refusal to forget what you once briefly touched. Because awakening doesn't fail when it fades. It fails when you believe it should have lasted forever. But even the briefest glimpse can change you, if you're willing to let it echo through your ordinary days. The emotional karma loop. There's a feeling you can't shake. It's not tied to any specific memory. It's older than your childhood, deeper than your biography. Maybe it's shame, or grief, or a longing that has no name. You've tried therapy, prayer, logic. You've tried ignoring it, but it returns, always, like a low hum under your life. You feel it in quiet moments, in your dreams, in the eyes of strangers. This is the emotional karma loop, a cycle not of events, but of emotion, repeating across lifetimes like an unresolved chord. Your soul keeps humming through different bodies. Karma is often talked about in terms of action, cause and effect. You steal, you suffer, you give, you receive. But beneath the actions lie emotions, the real glue of karmic recurrence. You can stop doing the thing, but if the feeling remains, unhealed, unacknowledged, it continues to ripple, not in behavior, in being. In dreams, this loop becomes visible. You may dream of a situation completely foreign to your current life, different clothes, different century, different face, but the feeling is exactly the same. A helpless rage, a silent ache, a desperate yearning for approval. And when you wake, you feel it in your gut as if you've just revisited the root, but didn't quite pull it out. Because the emotional karma loop doesn't run on memory. It runs on energy. You might be living a good life, but inside there's a background sadness you can't explain, or a tension in your chest that no diagnosis can name. You assume it's yours, from this life. But what if it isn't? What if it's the echo of grief from a past incarnation where you lost a child? Or shame from a betrayal you never made right? Or guilt for surviving when others didn't? The soul doesn't carry events. It carries charge. And when it reincarnates, it brings that emotional electricity with it, seeking moments in the new life to release it, resolve it, rewrite it. But if you don't recognize it, you reenact it. You find yourself in relationships that pull the same thread. You react too strongly to minor slights. You sabotage joy because guilt whispers that you don't deserve it. And the loop continues, not because you're flawed, but because the emotion hasn't been witnessed at its true origin. Some people dream of being someone else, someone cruel, or passive, or lost, and feel overwhelming emotion in the dream, not as a lesson, but as a release. They cry in the dream for a life they've never lived, and wake up lighter, unexplainably at peace. That's the power of recognizing the loop. You don't have to remember every life. You just have to listen to the feeling that keeps returning. When you name it, not with story, but with presence, it begins to unravel, not instantly, but steadily. And as the loop loosens, something miraculous happens. You stop reacting from old pain. You stop reenacting a grief that was never yours to carry alone. You start choosing from now, not from then. And that's how karma ends. Not with payment, but with integration. So if you feel something that won't go away, that doesn't seem to belong to this chapter, pause. Sit with it. Let it speak. Let it weep. Let it finish. Because maybe it's not here to harm you. Maybe it's here to complete a sentence the soul started lifetimes ago. The quantum jump. Glitch. You wake up, and something feels misaligned. Your room is the same. Your clothes are folded where they should be. The calendar hasn't changed. But you have, subtly. You feel older or younger. A thought you've always carried no longer makes sense. A person you once longed for feels like a stranger. You chalk it up to mood, to fatigue. But part of you wonders, did something shift while I was sleeping? This is the quantum jump glitch, the unsettling phenomenon where consciousness slips, or perhaps leaps, between nearly identical versions of reality, creating ripples in memory, behavior, and perception. It doesn't begin with a bang. It begins with dissonance. You forget a detail you've never forgotten. You notice a scar you don't remember earning. You recall a conversation no one else remembers. You hear yourself say something that feels new, not rehearsed, not aligned with who you've been. And yet, it feels right, like you've stepped into the version of you who's already made a choice you were still struggling with. In dreams, the glitch intensifies. You may dream of waking up and going about your day, but small elements are off. Your job is slightly different. A deceased relative is alive. You're married, but to someone else. It's not a surreal fantasy. It's a hyper-real version of your life, lived out in exquisite detail. And when you finally wake up, for real this time, you carry the weight of having been somewhere else entirely. The quantum jump glitch suggests that the soul doesn't just travel through time in a straight line. It moves across variants, alternate versions of your life, yourself, your choices. And sometimes, in dream, or in moments of deep unconsciousness, or trauma, or stillness, a jump occurs. You don't leap in body. You leap in trajectory. Maybe you were on a path of avoidance, fear, repetition, and somewhere in the dream, something aligned. You forgave. You surrendered. You chose truth. And that moment, so small, was enough to shift the needle. When you returned, the world hadn't changed, but your place in it had. You may notice that certain memories begin to feel distant, not because they're fading, but because they belong to a different version of you, the one who didn't make the jump. And now, you're living slightly ahead of where you thought you were. You're grieving something you never lost. You're missing someone you've never met. That's the cost of the jump. Because you didn't just leap forward, you leapt across. And part of you remembers what didn't happen. The glitch isn't always peaceful. Sometimes it's jarring. You feel like a stranger in your own skin. Your closest relationships feel subtly misaligned. You move through familiar spaces and feel displaced. It takes time to land in the new version of you, but you will land. And when you do, something unlocks. A thought that never occurred to you becomes obvious. A fear that once defined you no longer speaks. You become quietly and unceremoniously someone different. The dream didn't lie to you. It moved you. It allowed you, for a moment, to rehearse a different version of your becoming. And when the soul was ready, it made the switch. So if you wake up feeling not just off, but other, don't panic. You may have jumped, not because the old path was wrong, but because a better one was waiting. And all you had to do was sleep. The regression. Ghost. You feel yourself changing, not forward, but backward. You were growing, evolving, healing. And then, slowly, something turned. You react in ways you thought you'd outgrown. You fall into patterns that feel too old, too small. You think, I thought I was done with this. But it's not just emotional backsliding. It's deeper, heavier, like a shadow stepped back in. This is the regression ghost, the subtle, often unrecognized phenomenon where a fragment of a past self reattaches, pulling your present identity into an older shape. It doesn't arrive with drama. It doesn't announce itself. One day you're centered. The next, you're anxious for no reason, snapping at people, distrusting those you used to trust. You can't quite name it, but something has shifted, and not in the direction you were heading. The regression ghost doesn't come from your childhood, though it may rhyme with it. It doesn't come from trauma, though it may activate the same reflexes. It comes from elsewhere, another life, another version of you, one who didn't finish what you're trying to finish now. And sometimes that self comes knocking. In dreams, it appears as a younger you, not by age, but by awareness. A past life self, reactive and wounded, stepping in at moments of stress. You may see them begging, blaming, hiding. You may be them, speaking in ways you thought you'd outgrown, feeling jealous, paranoid, small. You wake up ashamed. But the dream wasn't regression. It was communication. The ghost isn't here to sabotage you. It's here to merge, to complete the integration that didn't happen the first time. Some regressions are karmic echoes, not punishments, just emotional muscle memory. When life gets hard, the soul sometimes reaches for what's familiar, even if it no longer fits. That old identity, the warrior, the martyr, the manipulator, the child, steps in. Not because you failed, but because that version of you wasn't done speaking. They still carry something, a belief, a defense, a grief. And unless you listen, they keep pulling you back. Not because they're powerful, but because they are unseen. Healing the regression. Ghost doesn't mean fighting it. It means witnessing it. When you find yourself acting like someone you used to be, not in nostalgia, but in fear, pause. Ask, who is this version of me? What are they trying to protect? What are they trying to say? You may discover that the self you keep falling back into is actually frozen, stuck in a moment long before this life. A version of you who died afraid, who lost something they never mourned, who never got to grow beyond that loop. And now that loop is yours. But you don't have to repeat it. You can breathe it, name it, say, I see you. You're safe now. You don't have to do this anymore. I've got it from here. And in doing so, the ghost softens, not exorcised, not destroyed, integrated, and you move forward again. Not cleanly, not perfectly, but with a deeper sense of who you carry inside you. Because the soul doesn't just evolve, it remembers. And every step forward sometimes requires walking back to take someone with you. The unfinished love contract. You dream of someone again. It's not the first time. Their face appears clearly, their presence familiar in a way that shakes you. Sometimes they speak. Sometimes they don't need to. The love is there, immediate, undeniable. But so is the distance. You try to reach them, but they fade. You try to stay, but you wake. And in the hours that follow, their absence feels more real than anyone's presence. This is the unfinished love contract, the phenomenon where two souls are bound across lifetimes by a love that was never fully realized, never properly ended, and never entirely forgotten. You may not know who they are. You may never meet them in waking life, but in dream, you recognize them instantly. There's no hesitation. You know how they move, how they breathe, how they look at you. There's no getting to know you, only remembering you. And that remembrance stirs something deep, old, sacred. These love contracts aren't always romantic. Some are born of deep friendship, some of loss, some from a promise made under stars long gone, in places the waking world has no name for. But whatever the shape, the feeling is the same, unfinished. In the dream, you might find yourselves together in the moments just before parting. A train pulling away, a war erupting, a decision made too late. You wake with a lump in your throat, a sense of almost healed, almost spoken, almost loved. And that's the weight of it. Because when a soul connection like this gets interrupted by death, by fear, by timing, it doesn't vanish. It just waits. It loops. And the dream becomes its echo chamber. You may carry this energy into your waking life without realizing it. You meet someone and instantly feel drawn or repelled, not by them, but by the soul contract energy they stir in you. You may enter relationships that feel intense, but incomplete, magnetic, yet mismatched, because you're trying to finish a story from another lifetime with the wrong bet. Some love contracts are not meant to be fulfilled in this life, not because you're unworthy, but because this chapter isn't the ending. It's the acknowledgement, a moment of seeing, of grieving, of forgiving what couldn't be. And in that, the soul begins to untangle. But sometimes, just sometimes, you do meet them again, and the recognition is mutual. You speak, and the words feel like continuation. You laugh, and the sound feels centuries old. And even if the relationship never becomes anything the world would label complete, the contract, in its own quiet way, has been honored. In dreams, these moments come without warning. You walk through a city that isn't yours and turn a corner, and they're there. You hold them. You don't speak. You just exist in the same space. And for those few minutes, the ache lifts. The loop pauses. That's not fantasy. That's the soul touching closure. So if you carry a longing that doesn't match your life, if you dream of someone who feels more real than the people around you, if you feel love that has no outlet, no name, no explanation, don't dismiss it. You may be remembering a contract left open, and the dream isn't trying to torture you. It's trying to complete the sentence. Even if that sentence ends not in reunion, but in reverent release. The emotional scar inheritance. There are wounds in you that don't have stories, fears that don't trace back to any moment in this life, griefs that arrive uninvited, like clouds forming on a blue sky. You've looked inward. You've searched your past. You've asked, why do I feel this way? Where is this coming from? But no answer satisfies. And deep down, something in you whispers, this pain is not entirely mine. This is the emotional scar inheritance, the phenomenon where the soul carries the unresolved emotional imprints of previous incarnations, ancestors, or both, as if they were its own. These scars are not visible. They don't appear on skin. They don't even always appear in behavior. They live deeper, in your reactions, in your instincts, in the way you flinch when someone raises their voice, in the way you hesitate before trusting, even when no one's given you a reason to doubt. You may feel like you were born grieving, or angry, or afraid of something that has never happened. These are not flaws. They're resonances. Echoes of lives where your soul experienced something it didn't get to finish feeling. Trauma frozen in motion. Pain paused mid-sentence. And now you carry that frozen emotion, waiting, perhaps in this life, for it to finally move through. In dreams, the inheritance becomes vivid. You're crying in the arms of someone you don't know. You're watching a fire you didn't start consume something you love. You scream a name that has no place in your waking life, but breaks your heart in the dream. And when you wake, the scar remains, not just as sadness, but as identity. You feel shaped by something invisible. Sometimes the scar isn't even yours. It belongs to someone in your lineage. A grandmother who lost a child. A father who never forgave himself. Their emotions pass down not just through DNA, but through the energetic body. You inherit not the memory, but the impact. And so, you grieve what was never yours, but lives in you all the same. This isn't weakness. This is capacity. The soul holds what it couldn't resolve, not to punish itself, but to wait for a time when the pain could finally be felt all the way through. And maybe this lifetime, your body, your tenderness, is the container strong enough for that release. But the danger of emotional scar inheritance is misidentification. You begin to believe the fear is your personality. The sadness is your truth. You live small to manage what was never yours to begin with. You shape your story around echoes. The healing doesn't come from understanding every origin. It comes from asking, does this emotion want to move through me? Not because I deserve it, but because I can finally let it go. And if the answer is yes, then you feel it. You let the grief shake your bones. You let the fear tremble your breath. You hold space for the scream that never got to rise. And in doing so, you offer release to a soul that's been waiting across lifetimes for someone, you, to give it permission to exhale. So the next time you feel a pain that makes no sense, don't dismiss it. Don't bury it. Breathe with it. You may be the first version of you, strong enough, gentle enough, awake enough to set it free. The forgotten origin paradox. You've searched for meaning in this life, for purpose, for truth, for home. You've followed paths, teachers, dreams, and yet, deep in your chest, something persists. A question with no shape, a sense of exile, a feeling that no matter how far you travel, inward or outward, there is still something just beyond your reach. You don't remember what it is, but you know you've lost it. This is the forgotten origin paradox, the soul's quiet awareness that it has come from somewhere beyond, but cannot remember what, where, or who it was before the long road of reincarnation began. It's not about past lives. This is before that, before the stories, before the karma, before even the first heartbeat. This paradox lives at the edge of memory. It's the pull you feel toward silence, toward the stars, toward dreams where language dissolves and time has no shape. You may dream of falling, not down, but into form, into density, into separation, a soft, cosmic descent. You wake with a sense of mourning, but you don't know what you're grieving, because what you're grieving is the place your soul left before it knew what forgetting was. Some say it's source, others, the God place, others still, a home beyond the veil, a soul cluster, a celestial city, a realm of light. But whatever it was, you don't remember it clearly. You remember the missing, the ache, the shadow of a truth too vast to carry into flesh. And so the paradox, you long to return to something you can no longer define. You feel drawn to sacred texts, to spiritual music, to moments of awe, not for what they are, but for what they almost awaken. You catch glimpses in a child's eyes, in a dream where you dissolve into golden mist, in the pause between your breath and the wind. You know that something holy is behind this life, but your hands can't hold it, and your mind can't keep it. In dreams, this origin sometimes appears as absence, a blank space where a name should be, a doorway that leads only to light, a figure you recognize not by form, but by feeling. And just before you touch it, the dream ends, because you weren't meant to remember with your mind. You were meant to reawaken it through being. The forgotten origin paradox humbles you. It reminds you that no matter how far you climb in knowledge, the soul remains rooted in mystery. That your journey isn't a straight line home, but a spiral, one that loops through lives, through forgetting and remembering, through joy and loss, until one day, maybe in a moment of stillness, you hear it again, a vibration, a call, not loud, not urgent, just familiar. And you'll know. You didn't lose it. You are it. You've carried it all along, not as memory, but as essence. So when you feel like something's missing in a way you can't explain, when no success, no relationship, no revelation feels quite enough, sit. Close your eyes, not to seek, but to remember what you never really forgot. You are not just becoming something. You are returning to what you were before the world told you what to be. The death dream theory. You dream of dying, but the dream doesn't end. You feel the impact. The breath stops. The world darkens. And yet, you remain. A presence without body. A quiet awareness hovering above the scene or floating into something else entirely. There is no panic, only continuity. You wake up gasping, Not because the dream was terrifying, but because something in it felt too true. This is the death dream theory, the idea that some dreams don't just simulate death, but recreate the moment of it, and possibly even extend from what lingers after. You've had those dreams. The fall that never ends, the last heartbeat, the moment of letting go. And sometimes, what comes after is more vivid than anything else in sleep. A tunnel, a light, a garden, a vast nothingness, or even another life beginning. The theory is simple, but unsettling. What if the dreams we think are just metaphors, are actually replays? Not symbols, but memories. The final moments of a life lived long ago, encoded into our soul's archive, bleeding through into the dream space when something in our current life stirs the echo. You may dream of a battlefield and feel your chest tighten, your limbs go cold, as though your last breath already happened. Or you may drown in silence, not in terror, but in release. The dream doesn't wake you in the moment of death. It carries you through it. And what happens next is the part we're never taught to expect. You're still there. Many who've experienced near-death experiences describe this same sensation. A pulling back from the body, a detachment, a state of expanded awareness. And in dreams, it happens too. Without trauma, without crisis. Just a deep, enveloping shift from embodiment into something else. And that's where the death dream theory sharpens. What if some of your dreams aren't just imagined death scenes? What if they are death scenes from other lives? What if the dream isn't replaying fear, but reminding you how often you've done this before? You begin to notice patterns. The way the dream always ends with silence. The moment you float above your body. The face of a stranger who holds your hand as you fade. You feel the grief of leaving, or the peace, or the regret. And you carry that emotional imprint into the next life, into this one. Sometimes the dream starts after death. You're moving through a landscape not shaped like Earth, not heaven, not hell, but a middle space, a processing room, a waiting station. And you see others, quiet, transparent, waiting too. You ask a question, but no one speaks. Yet somehow you understand. You are between. You wake from these dreams different, not frightened, but aware, not just of death, but of the thread that runs through it. You don't fear the end in quite the same way, because you've already felt it. And it didn't feel like the end. The theory doesn't try to answer what lies beyond. It doesn't claim dreams are perfect replicas. Only that the soul remembers more than we realize. And when we sleep, when the mind loosens its grip, those final moments surface. Not to scare us, but to reacquaint us with impermanence. So if you've ever dreamed of dying and found yourself still dreaming afterward, don't brush it off. You may have touched a thread from your own deeper archive. You may have walked the seam between ending and beginning. And you may have remembered, if only briefly, that death is not the curtain call. It's the scene change, the exit, denial mechanism. You dream you're at the threshold, a gate opens. A voice says, "You can go now." You feel the weight of many lives behind you, the tiredness, the readiness. You step forward, but something tugs you back. Not fear, not duty. Something subtler. A whisper of doubt, a glance at what you're leaving behind. A question. Am I really allowed to go? And in that moment of hesitation, the gate vanishes. The dream resets. You wake up back here, back in your life. And you wonder, why didn't I walk through? This is the exit denial mechanism, the last and most elusive barrier in the reincarnation cycle. It isn't external. It isn't imposed. It is the soul's own reluctance to leave what has become familiar, even when it longs to return to source. It lives in the deepest part of the subconscious, the part that has grown used to gravity, to flesh, to stories, to being someone. You might think, when the soul is ready, it simply ascends, dissolves, transcends. But the truth is more complex. The longer you live through lives, the more attached you become, not to the pleasure, not even to the pain, but to the identity. And that identity doesn't want to die, even when you do. In dreams, this mechanism shows up as delay. You're always almost leaving. The train always just departed. The door always just closed. The voice always says, "Soon." You wake feeling like freedom was right there, but your hands remained at your sides. Why? Because the soul is layered. One layer wants release. Another clings, not out of fear, but out of familiarity. You've spent lifetimes becoming. Letting go of that self feels like becoming nothing, even if you know that's not true. This denial is not a flaw. It's a function. It protects you from rushing your exit, from leaving before you've fully integrated all that you've lived. And sometimes the mechanism kicks in because a tiny thread is still tangled, a word unsaid, a pain unhonored, a truth unaccepted. You think you're ready, but the soul knows better. It says, "Not yet." And so you return. But here's the shift. The more aware you become of the exit denial mechanism, the less power it has over you. When you dream of leaving and don't, when you sense completion but can't act on it, you stop blaming fate. You start asking, what part of me is still saying no? And that's when the real work begins. Not escaping, not transcending, but listening to the version of you that still feels unfinished, to the lifetimes you tried to bury, to the love you withheld, to the fear you never dared to name. Because exiting the cycle isn't about defeating something. It's about releasing everything you once thought you needed to be. And when that release is true, when it's whole, the gate doesn't need to appear. You become the threshold. You don't leave the cycle. The cycle lets go of you. Because, finally, you have let go of it. The cosmic bureaucracy. Paradox. You dream of standing in a hallway that stretches infinitely in both directions. Doors line the walls. Behind each, a figure waits, some in robes, some in suits, some with clipboards, glowing scrolls, or screens that flicker with symbols you don't recognize. You're there for a reason, but no one will tell you what it is. They ask questions you don't understand. They speak in a language that feels like code. Forms appear. Rules change. You're caught in a waiting room that belongs to no place and every place. Welcome to the cosmic bureaucracy paradox, the unsettling dream world in which reincarnation feels not like a sacred dance, but like an administrative maze. You might laugh when you wake up. That was absurd, you think. But underneath the absurdity is something colder, sharper, a strange discomfort. Because even in the dream, you felt it. The sense that your next life wasn't chosen by you, but processed. Like a vassal in a cabinet. Like an application pending review. In some of these dreams, you're applying for your next incarnation. You submit a request. You ask for clarity, for peace, for purpose. The response? Your karma is incomplete. Or you've already been assigned. You ask to see a supervisor, and they vanish. You're told to sit, to wait, to forget. And then, you're born again. The cosmic bureaucracy paradox suggests a version of reincarnation where the system is real, but impersonal. Where lives are sorted, approved, not with wisdom or compassion, but with the cold indifference of cosmic order. Not cruelty, just process. Some dreamers describe offices made of light. Others walk through temples filled with celestial archivists. Everything glows, but nothing listens. You're not punished. You're just handled. This paradox hits hardest when you start asking, did I choose this life? Or was I processed into it? Was this really my soul's desire? Or just the next available opening in some unseen system? And worse, does the system care if I'm ready? Some say these dreams reflect the soul's struggle with meaninglessness, that they're projections of our fear that life is arbitrary. But maybe they reveal something deeper, that even in the most sacred systems, scale can create detachment, that even divine order can feel like red tape. And yet, sometimes in these dreams, you meet someone different, a guide who pauses, who looks at you, not as a number, but as a presence. And with a glance, they say nothing. But everything changes. The form disappears. The walls dissolve. And for a moment, you remember. You are more than the system that processed you. This is the true paradox. That even within the most rigid cosmic machinery, grace can still intervene. That the soul, though routed and recycled, is never truly lost in the process. That behind the glint of bureaucracy, something still breathes, still watches, still waits for you to wake up. Because perhaps the system was never meant to control. Perhaps it was meant to reveal how deeply you still cling to hierarchy, to fairness, to explanation. And in letting go of that, you might step off the conveyor belt and back into conscious choice. So if you wake from dreams of celestial departments, glowing terminals, and whispered numbers, don't dismiss them as cosmic satire. Ask, where am I still waiting for permission to live the life I already have? Because the system might not care, but you do. And that's where the soul's real power begins. The soul sync delay. You wake up one day, and nothing feels quite real. You go through your motions, brush your teeth, check your phone, answer messages, but it all feels off. Like your body showed up, but your soul is running a few steps behind. There's a lag, a disconnection. Like the person inside you hasn't quite caught up with the life that's already in motion. This is the soul sync delay, a subtle but powerful phenomenon where the soul takes longer than the body to fully arrive after reincarnation, trauma, or even deep spiritual transformation. It can happen at birth. Some souls don't fully inhabit the body right away. They hover. They drift. Children may feel out of place for years, not just emotionally, but existentially. They look in the mirror and feel like a visitor. They speak, but the words feel borrowed. They carry wisdom, but wear it like an ill-fitting coat. And sometimes it doesn't happen until later. A sudden shock, a loss, a shift, and the soul, startled or unprepared, pulls back slightly. Not gone, just unsynced. You keep living, but inside you feel hollow, not numb, not broken, just misaligned. In dreams, this delay becomes visible. You walk through familiar places, but your reflection is wrong. Your voice echoes like it belongs to someone else. You meet people who call you by your name, but you feel like an understudy, filling a role while waiting for the real self to return. Or you dream of falling into your body, again and again. Like waking into a life you're not ready to live. Like your soul is catching the tail end of a train it was supposed to board long ago. The sync delay can last days, years, sometimes lifetimes. And it's not failure. It's timing. The soul, expansive and multidimensional, doesn't always land all at once. It tests the waters. It feels through the nervous system. It listens to the body's memory, the family's patterns, the world's vibration, and waits for the right moment to anchor fully. This delay often looks like spiritual restlessness. You have a life, but it doesn't feel like yours. You succeed, but the joy doesn't stick. You love, but something remains slightly out of phase. You try to fix it, thinking something is wrong. But what's wrong is not what's broken. It's what's not yet integrated. You may not need healing. You may just need time. Time to let the soul finish its descent. To allow the parts of you still hovering, still watching, still uncertain, to enter gently. And how do you do that? You slow down. You stop performing the identity. You sit in silence long enough for the deeper self to catch up. You stop asking, why don't I feel right? And start asking, what part of me is still arriving? Because the soul is not a switch. It's a song. And sometimes the verses come later than the chorus. Dreams will help. They'll show you the moments where the sync almost completes. The glimpses of full embodiment. The moment you look in the mirror and, for once, feel whole. The moment you speak, and the words come from your center, not your conditioning. And when that happens, when the soul finally lands, it's quiet. No fireworks, no light beams, just a soft, powerful yes that hums through your body, a sense that you are here now, fully. So if you're moving through life with a faint sense of delay, like someone's watching you from behind your own eyes, wait, breathe, welcome yourself back. Because sometimes the deepest healing is just giving your soul permission to arrive in its own time. The astral interference. Thread. You wake from a dream that wasn't yours. The images were vivid, the emotions strong, but something felt off. The narrative made no sense. The setting wasn't familiar. And most unsettling of all, you didn't feel like the main character. It was as if you'd tuned in to someone else's dream, someone else's memory, someone else's energetic stream. This is the astral interference thread. The theory that not all dreams originate within your own soul, but that some are the result of unintentional or even intentional interference on the astral plane. We imagine our dreams to be private theaters, internal landscapes sculpted by our subconscious. But what if dreams are more like a shared ocean? What if, while sleeping, your soul travels through currents of thought, emotion, and frequency that belong to others? And what if, sometimes, it gets entangled? The interference thread begins subtly. You may dream of people you've never met, speaking languages you don't know. You may feel intense emotions, rage, grief, ecstasy that don't match your own life story. You wake up feeling invaded, as if you've lived a scene from a life you didn't choose. But interference doesn't always feel foreign. Sometimes it comes with a strange sense of intimacy, like you were granted access to someone else's inner world, and now you can't unsee it. Their trauma lingers in your nervous system. Their desire pulses faintly through your day. And you wonder, why am I still thinking about someone I only knew in a dream? There are many sources of interference. Sometimes it's emotional residue from someone close to you, a partner, a parent, a stranger you passed on the street whose field brushed against yours. Other times, it's ancestral, a fragment of someone long gone, moving through your bloodline, showing up in your sleep as an unresolved image or message. And occasionally, it's intentional. Some traditions speak of psychic chords, thought forms, energetic projections, beings, incarnate or not, who latch on to the dreaming mind to feed, observe, manipulate, or plead, not always malevolent, often lost, but always disruptive. These dreams tend to carry a strange static, a disjointed quality, a feeling that something in the narrative is foreign code. You might dream of being controlled, watched, tested, or of having to escape something invisible. You may experience a sudden blankness mid-dream, as if someone has cut the signal. You wake up feeling drained, disoriented, altered. But here's the empowering truth. Just because interference can happen doesn't mean you're powerless to it. The soul has sovereignty. The more conscious you become within your dreams, the more you notice the tone, the energy, the source, the more you can discern what is truly yours. Some dreamers develop the ability to scan a dream while it's unfolding, to pause mid-scene and ask, "Is this mine?" And often, just asking begins to unravel the interference. Sometimes all it takes is presence, sometimes a quiet boundary. Not this time. And sometimes it's compassion, realizing that even the interference is just another lost frequency trying to find its way back to source. So if you wake up with memories that don't belong to you, if you carry dreams that feel like eavesdropped transmissions, if your sleep leaves you heavy with someone else's story, pause, return, remember who you are. Because while the astral is vast and open, your soul remains your own. And the thread of interference, once seen, can always be untied. The memory leak phenomenon. You're brushing your teeth, tying your shoes, walking down a hallway you've walked 100 times, and then it hits you. A flash, a feeling, a scene that doesn't belong to this moment, or even this life. A man's voice calling out. A distant city skyline. The smell of firewood and sea salt. You freeze, not because it makes sense, but because it doesn't. It arrives uninvited, uncontextualized, and yet absolutely real. You've just experienced the memory leak phenomenon, the strange and sudden surfacing of memories from other lifetimes, slipping into your present like water through an unseen crack. These aren't imagined scenes. They don't unfold like dreams. They interrupt, briefly, sharply, sometimes with images, sometimes with emotion. You might feel crushing grief for a child you never had, a spike of joy in the middle of a traffic light. You might remember a goodbye you've never said, or wake with a name on your lips that no one around you knows. The memory leak doesn't ask permission. It bleeds through when you're least guarded. When the conscious mind is quiet. When routine softens your grip on reality. That's when it slips in. Not to confuse, but to remind. Because somewhere, beneath the logic and the calendars and the skin, your soul is carrying more than one lifetime of story. In dreams, it happens more vividly. You see yourself in clothing you've never worn, speaking a language you don't know. You know the layout of a house you've never seen. You mourn someone before they even die. And when you wake, the memory stays, not like a dream, but like a bruise on the edge of awareness. Some believe these leaks come from unfinished business, lives that didn't close cleanly, decisions that fractured something in the soul's timeline. The memory doesn't return as punishment. It returns as a request. Will you finally hold this now? But not all leaks are heavy. Some are filled with beauty. You might hear music that feels anciently yours. Smell a scent that pulls tears from your eyes with no explanation. These aren't random triggers. They're fragments, shards of lives still echoing through the walls of this one. And sometimes, it's not your past life at all. It's a parallel one, a version of you running alongside this timeline, just far enough apart to remain unseen, until something overlaps. A moment, a thought, a dream. And suddenly, you feel like someone else is remembering through you. That's the paradox of the memory leak phenomenon. It doesn't always tell you whose memory you're receiving, only that it matters, that it wants presence, not analysis, just acknowledgement. You don't need to understand every detail. You don't need to decode the scene. The value isn't in the memory itself. It's in your willingness to hold it without resistance. To say, yes, this too is part of my long becoming. And perhaps, with time, these fragments begin to weave. What once felt random begins to form a shape, a story, a soul history, not bound to one lifetime, but carried like a thread of gold through all of them. So the next time something rises unbidden, a name, a place, a grief, pause. Don't call it imagination, call it a return, because memory doesn't always belong to the brain. Sometimes it belongs to the soul, the timeline. Folding principle. You dream of two lives at once. In one, you're walking through a forest with a sense of quiet purpose. In another, you're in a high-rise office building, surrounded by light, movement, and static. But you're the same person, feeling both, being both. Not in sequence, but simultaneously. You wake up disoriented, as if two timelines were playing over each other, like overlapping music. This is the timeline folding principle, the idea that time doesn't always flow in a line, and sometimes the soul experiences multiple realities at once, bent back upon each other like pages of a book caught in a gust of wind. We're trained to think of life as linear. Birth, growth, end. Then maybe a new life. But what if it's not one life after another, but many lives unfolding at the same time, across layers of reality so closely woven that their edges blur? And what if the soul doesn't move through them chronologically, but consciously, touching moments here and there, leaping between outcomes, bending across timelines like light across water? In dreams, this principle emerges not as theory, but as experience. You may see yourself as two people in two different places, but share one thought, one feeling. You live one life's grief and another's joy at the same time. You dream of a younger version of yourself giving advice to an older one. You witness your death and birth as part of the same spiral. The mind tries to make sense of it, but the soul already understands. The folding isn't random. It often happens when something is about to shift. When a choice you're making here, now, sends ripples across versions of you who made other choices, married someone else, took a different job, forgave instead of walked away. In dreams, those versions don't stay locked in their own lanes. They reach out. They loop back. You may wake from a dream and feel like you're grieving something, but not from this life. Or you may feel peace over a decision you haven't made yet, as if the soul already lived through the outcome elsewhere and is whispering, "This is the one that frees us." Sometimes the folds collapse completely. You sit across from someone in a dream and know that in another life, they were your enemy. In another, your child. In another, your teacher. The lines blur, not to confuse you, but to reveal the truth, that all relationships, all stories, are facets of a single diamond, viewed from different angles in different timelines. And the soul? The soul is not linear. The soul is architectural. It expands through space, not through sequence. So what does this mean for you? It means that healing now can reach back, that a truth accepted today can shift a timeline that once ended in regret, that your growth is not isolated. It's echoing through versions of you who still need what you're finally beginning to understand. The dream isn't just showing you other lives. It's asking you to take responsibility for this one, because it might be the fulcrum, the central fold, the timeline where the healing lands, and everything else, past and future, rearranges itself around it. So when you dream of many versions of yourself colliding, don't turn away. You are not broken. You are folding. And what looks like chaos may be the soul's most elegant design, the light tunnel. Split. You dream of dying. But this time, you don't wake up in your bed gasping for air. Instead, you see the light, the tunnel, that familiar near-death iconography whispered across cultures and generations. You're moving through it, not fast, not slow, just steady. There's peace, clarity, a silence that feels like home. But then something fractures. The light splits. Two paths, two tunnels, diverging like choices you were never told you'd have. And deep within, a question arises. Which direction leads to life? Which one to something else? This is the light tunnel split, a rare and haunting dream encounter where even death seems to offer not one, but multiple exit routes. We're taught the tunnel leads to the afterlife, to the next realm, to peace. But what if at the moment of death or reincarnation, the soul isn't offered a single path, but a choice? What if that choice is never made consciously, but is still felt? And what if, in our dreams, we revisit that fork again and again, replaying a moment we don't remember choosing? In this dream, the light is not just guidance. It's division. One path pulls you with love, familiarity, the sense of reunion. The other? It vibrates with something else, curiosity, a quiet call to return. Not forward, but backward, back into life, into density, into pain, joy, and the unfinished business of being human again. Some dreamers report being torn, longing for the peace of the light, yet unable to resist the pull of the unfinished. Others are pushed, nudged, gently or forcefully redirected. Not yet. You still have more to learn. You're not done. And the dream ends there, abrupt, ambiguous. What if the tunnel is not just a passage, but a test of readiness? What if your next incarnation isn't dictated by karma, but by the subtle alignment of your soul at the moment you stand between those two lights? In the dream, you may find yourself split, not metaphorically, but literally. Two versions of you choosing different tunnels. One reincarnates, one moves on, and both exist simultaneously. Parallel paths that you only glimpse in the flicker of sleep. And when you wake, you feel it. A residue, a tension in the chest, a strange weight. Not fear, but the echo of a choice you don't remember making. It shows up in waking life, too. Moments where you feel like you're living a life that wasn't the one you originally meant to take. A timeline that feels slightly off, as though your soul slipped through the wrong tunnel. Or maybe the right one for a different lesson. The light tunnel. Split challenges our most sacred assumptions about death. It says, maybe there is no final destination, only branching corridors. Some lead to rebirth, some lead to release, some loop. And if time is non-linear, as many mystics suggest, then these tunnels may not just mark beginnings or ends. They may be portals to alternate lives already unfolding, which means your dreams of choosing, of splitting, of hesitating at the mouth of light may not be memories. They may be live transmissions. So the next time you dream of light, not warm and singular, but fractured and many, pay attention. You may be witnessing the moment your soul last made a choice, or the moment it is making one now. Because death may not be the end. It may be the crossroad. And the tunnel, despite what we've been told, doesn't lead in just one direction. The simulated destiny. Illusion. You've felt it before. maybe even often. A strange sense that everything is happening exactly as it should. That even your missteps, even your regrets, were part of a design too intricate to see. You meet someone at just the right time. You read a sentence that seems written only for you. You take the wrong road and find what you didn't know you needed. And a quiet thought settles in. Maybe this was all meant to be. But then, just as easily, doubt creeps in. What if it only feels that way? What if none of this is destiny, but programming? This is the simulated destiny illusion. The possibility that the soul, in its search for meaning, mistakes well-crafted patterns for fate. That what we call destiny may in fact be a highly responsive system, spiritual, energetic, or even artificial, that reflects not ultimate purpose, but our own beliefs, desires, and unfinished karma back to us in elegant, convincing loops. In dreams, this illusion tightens. You may dream of a grand moment, meeting your soulmate, finding a mysterious guide, discovering a map carved in light. Everything feels sacred, orchestrated, divine, but something in the dream starts to glitch. The guide repeats a phrase. The sky flickers. The destiny begins to look like a stage, and you realize this isn't a revelation. It's a script. You wake up questioning. Have I been following a path or walking a loop disguised as one? The illusion works because it's comforting. It wraps your pain in a narrative. It says, there's a reason you suffered. There's a higher plan. And sometimes that's true. But sometimes it's a design of the dream field itself, a simulation of purpose to keep the soul engaged, even when disengaged from its deeper truth. Think about the moments when you've been guided. Did the guidance challenge you or keep you circling? Did it expand your agency or feed your dependency? Did it ask you to awaken or just to follow? The simulated destiny. Illusion doesn't come from malice. It comes from complexity. The more deeply you've incarnated, the more material your soul has generated. Patterns, relationships, emotional code. And sometimes those threads weave themselves into a system so elaborate it feels like destiny. But it's not alignment. It's momentum. And when the soul starts mistaking momentum for mission, it sleeps with its eyes open. Some dreamers report moments of rupture, where a dream guide suddenly disappears, where a prophecy dissolves, where the narrative breaks, and what remains is not story, but silence, not direction, but spaciousness. And in that void, something true begins to speak. Quietly. Not with grand plans, but with presence. Because real destiny doesn't feel like a program. It feels like clarity, without architecture. A knowing that doesn't seduce. A path that doesn't manipulate. A choice that doesn't demand belief. So how do you tell the difference? You slow down. You ask, is this path asking me to become more awake or more obedient? You notice when the dream gives you too many answers, too easily. And you stay open to the truth that sometimes your real destiny begins only when you stop chasing the one that was handed to you too perfectly. The purpose. Contamination. Loop. You come into this life with a pull, soft at first, but undeniable. A draw toward something. Healing, creating, building, teaching, wandering. It isn't a profession or a goal. It's a tone, a sense of orientation. You don't know why, but you feel it in your bones. I was meant to do something. And then, as the years unfold, the clarity begins to blur. You compromise, you adapt, you grow up. And one day, you wake up, disconnected. The pull is still there, but layered under expectation, survival, identity. This is the purpose contamination loop, the slow erosion of soul direction, not by forgetting, but by misinterpreting the purpose you came here with. In dreams, you see the original thread. You're doing something simple, planting seeds, guiding lost travelers, painting walls in colors that change emotion. The dream doesn't hand you a career path. It returns you to an essence. But when you wake, the mind tries to package it, tries to fit the sacred into a resume. And the loop begins. You mistake clarity for outcome. You mistake meaning for recognition. And worst of all, you mistake your soul's calling for something you must prove to others. This is how purpose becomes contaminated. It's not stolen in a single moment. It's rewritten slowly. You're told what success looks like, what matters, what doesn't. You adjust. You compromise. And eventually, your original purpose is still there, but it's wearing someone else's face. You become a healer, but only through systems that ignore the soul. You become a teacher, but only to survive. You become an artist, but your hands stop moving unless someone else is watching. The soul still tries to speak, but its language has been co-opted, marketed, diluted. And then come the dreams. You return to the garden, the quiet road, the version of you who creates with no audience, who speaks truth with no strategy, who simply lives the purpose without branding it. And when you wake, something aches, not because your life is meaningless, but because the meaning has been distorted. This loop doesn't just confuse you, it wears you down. Because when the soul senses it's not aligned with what it came to do, it begins to drain. No matter how much success or validation you gather, it doesn't land. You feel restless, or numb, or tired in a way no sleep can fix. And the paradox is, it's not because you failed to find your purpose. It's because you found it, and then slowly let it be reshaped into something else. But here's the hidden mercy. The soul doesn't forget. It keeps dreaming, keeps pulling, keeps sending signs, not grand or dramatic, but quiet course corrections. A sentence you read that brings tears, a memory from childhood that suddenly stings, a random, vivid dream of a life you might have lived if you hadn't turned away. And in those moments, you get a glimpse. The purpose is still there, beneath the layers, beneath the performance. You don't need to throw your life away to recover it. You only need to stop negotiating with it. Let it return as it was, raw, quiet, unpolished. Let it be inconvenient. Let it cost you something. That's when it becomes true again. So if you feel lost, if you feel like the fire has gone out, not because you don't know who you are, but because you do and haven't been living it, ask yourself, what if the thing I came here to do is still waiting for me, exactly where I dropped it? And what if all it takes is picking it back up not to sell, not to explain, but simply to live. The invisible lives effect. You carry a memory that doesn't belong anywhere in your current life, a feeling that arises when you hear a particular melody, walk through a certain forest, or touch something made by hand. It's not déjà vu. It's not fantasy. It's residue. From something not quite here, not quite now. You can't explain it, and no one else sees it. But inside, it lingers. This is the invisible lives effect, the quiet influence of lifetimes you've lived that never show up in history, never leave behind artifacts, but shape your soul in ways that define everything. Not all lives are remembered. Some leave behind no trace, no grand story, no trauma to be healed. They were simple, hidden, in between. But just because they're invisible doesn't mean they're irrelevant. In fact, some of the most powerful shifts in the soul's development come not from the dramatic lives, the ones full of battles, revolutions, heartbreaks, but from the quiet ones. The lifetime spent planting food, tending a fire, listening to the wind, walking away instead of staying, watching instead of acting. These lives don't appear in past life regressions. They don't show up in dreams with glowing symbols or intense narrative arcs. They whisper. They seep. They live in your silence. You might feel it when you're alone and comfortable there, in a way others find strange, or when your body knows how to do something your brain never learned, or when you crave simplicity, like it's sacred, because it once was, for you. In dreams, these lives flicker in and out. You may dream of sitting at a riverbank for hours, doing nothing, and wake up in tears, or dream of mending clothes, holding a child, sweeping a temple floor, and wake up feeling full. Because the soul remembers those lives, not for what they accomplished, but for how they felt. How you felt. These were the lives where you healed, not through confrontation, but through being. Where the soul wasn't learning through chaos, but through continuity. You may not recall the names or the place, but the resonance is here, in your values, your rhythms, your instincts. But the invisible lives effect also shows up in your invisible longings, desires for things you've never known, but miss deeply. You grieve a landscape you've never seen. You cry over a kind of love no one in this life has given you. You feel like your real story has always remained just out of reach. And that's the paradox. Because these invisible lives are not just forgotten. They are buried within you, integrated so deeply into your being that they no longer feel separate. They are the soil you grow from, not the fruit you display. They shaped your soul in ways no one can see, and in a world obsessed with evidence, proof, data, validation, this can feel alienating. Because the most meaningful parts of your soul's evolution may be the least dramatic, the least visible, the most unshared. But that doesn't make them less real. It makes them yours. So if you feel the presence of something deep and quiet in you, something unexplainable but essential, don't chase it. Sit with it. Listen. It might not tell you a story. It might not show you a past, but it will remind you that your soul is older than your memories and deeper than your name. Because not all lives are loud. Some simply become the stillness you carry now. The soul fragmentation puzzle. You dream of being many people at once, not metaphorically, literally. You shift bodies with scene. You're watching yourself from the corner of the room. Then suddenly, you're inside the eyes of a stranger. A second later, you're a child, then an old man, then something in between. The story never stops, but the center of gravity keeps shifting. You wake up scattered, emotionally full, but unsure of who exactly was dreaming. This is the soul fragmentation puzzle, the disorienting sensation that your soul isn't moving through life as a single unified being, but as a collection of selves splintered across timelines, bodies, and experiences. In theory, we think of the soul as one whole thing, linear, intact. But some dreamers and mystics have long whispered another truth, that the soul can fracture, not break in pain, but split in function. That different versions of you can live in parallel. That every choice you don't make spawns a version of you who did. And those versions don't always stay quiet. Dreams become the meeting place. You speak in a voice that isn't yours. You see a scar on your arm that your waking body doesn't have. You cry for a loss you've never lived. It's not drama, it's data, a download from another fragment, another you with their own arc bleeding through the veil. The fragmentation isn't always traumatic. Sometimes it's strategic. The soul may split off aspects of itself to explore different possibilities, lessons, paths. A version of you that pursued art. A version that never left home. One that chose love. One that chose solitude. You don't consciously remember these lives, but they remember you. And when they do, the dreams come. You may sit at a table surrounded by strangers who somehow feel like family. They speak your thoughts before you can. They mourn things you've never lost. And you understand, without needing to be told, we are all pieces of the same origin. Each face, each voice, another limb of your own soul, stretched across lifetimes, like constellations across a shared sky. The puzzle deepens when fragments go unheard. When one version of you, trapped in an unlived life, begins to call louder. You feel it in your waking world as restlessness, unexplained grief, dreams that return with obsessive insistence. You try to rationalize it, but the truth is simpler, stranger. Part of you is trying to come home. Some traditions speak of soul retrieval, rituals that bring back lost pieces of the self scattered by trauma, exile, or denial. But the puzzle isn't just about loss. It's about reunion, about realizing that your soul has never been one flat identity, but a mosaic, unfinished, evolving, still learning how to become whole. And the dream is where you gather the pieces, not by force, but by presence. You welcome the child you abandoned, the version of you who never got to speak, the life you almost lived. You let them tell their story. You let them rest. And slowly, you begin to feel it. A settling, a recentering, not in ego, but in essence. You may never put the entire puzzle together. You may never remember every face, every name. But that's not the point. The point is to realize that you are not fragmented because you're broken. You are fragmented because you are vast. And the dream is simply reminding you how to carry all of yourself at once. The reincarnation. Burnout. You wake up not with fear, not with sadness, but with a kind of soul-level fatigue. The day hasn't begun, but you're already tired, not physically, not emotionally, but in a way that makes no sense at all. Like you've been alive for far too long. Like you've seen too many sunrises through too many eyes. This is the reincarnation burnout. The quiet, often invisible exhaustion that comes from living too many lives without enough rest between them. You don't remember most of them, of course, but your dreams hint at the accumulation. Century after century, role after role, you dream of being the peasant, the warrior, the priest, the midwife, the child who never made it past 10. The lives come fast. Some overlap, some blur. And you wake up feeling heavy, not because any one dream was dark, but because the sheer weight of continuity is pressing down. This is a different kind of burnout. It's not about overworking in this life. It's about carrying the residue of lifetimes where you never got a chance to stop, to breathe, to reset, where you died mid-struggle, only to reincarnate directly back into another round. No time to integrate, no space to reflect, just more doing, more trying, more being. Some people feel this early in life. Children who act old before their time. Teenagers who are already weary. Adults who feel like they've lived 5 lifetimes by the time they reach 30. It's not psychological. It's not personality. It's soul history bleeding through. In dreams, the fatigue takes shape. You try to run, but your legs won't move. You try to speak, but the words are already old. You try to start something new, but everything around you is crumbling, or worse, repeating, like you've done it before, like you're trapped in an eternal return. You may even dream of asking to stop, to rest. You speak to unseen beings, guides, gatekeepers, administrators of incarnation, and plead, not again. Sometimes they listen. Sometimes they smile gently and say, "One more," and you wake, aching. This isn't self-pity. It's not escapism. It's recognition that perhaps the soul has limits, not fixed ones, but thresholds. And when those thresholds are passed too many times, without pause, the soul starts to dim. Not in essence, in will. You start to lose your why. Not out of despair, but from exhaustion of repetition. You've been the teacher, the student, the rebel, the healer. You've played the roles, learned the lessons, and still you're back, again. And yet, here you are, still breathing, still dreaming. So the question becomes, how do you live with reincarnation burnout? Not by escaping life, but by living it differently, more slowly, more gently, by refusing to chase every lesson, by resting when the soul says rest, even when the world says run, by honoring the part of you that no longer wants to be reborn, just to be busy. Sometimes, the most radical act for a soul like yours isn't doing more. It's remembering how to be still, to watch the sunrise not as a beginning, but as a moment, to let this life be quieter than the last, to let the soul digest itself before taking on another chapter, And maybe, just maybe, when this life ends, you'll be given a different choice. Not a rebirth, but a season of silence, a garden to walk through without a name, a pause between heartbeats that stretches into peace. So if you feel weary in ways no one else understands, trust that. It's not your body. It's your soul, whispering, "I've come so far. Please, let me breathe." The soul signature. Disruption. There's a feeling you can't explain. An unease not tied to any specific fear, but rooted somewhere deeper. You still recognize your face in the mirror, but something behind the eyes feels blurred. You try to speak your truth, but the words arrive hollow. You reach for a passion that once lit you up, but the flame won't catch. You ask yourself, where did I go? This is the soul signature disruption, the quiet, disorienting condition where your unique spiritual frequency becomes scrambled, diluted, or out of sync with the life you're living. Every soul carries a distinct tone, a signature, not a personality, not a mood, a vibration. Yours may be contemplative, electric, expansive, gentle, defiant, luminous. It's not what you do, but how your soul sings through you. When aligned, you feel it as coherence, resonance, flow. But sometimes, something shifts. You stop feeling like yourself, not dramatically, gradually. The tone of your inner voice changes. Your dreams feel foreign. People start reacting to you differently. You try to return to what once grounded you, but it slips through your hands like water. You're not broken. You're just disrupted. Dreams are where this becomes clearest. You may see yourself as a copy. You watch a version of you walking through familiar places, but it's all simulation. The expressions are practiced, the words pre-scripted. You may find yourself screaming, but without sound, or trying to wake up within the dream, only to fall into another dream within it. Sometimes you're replaced entirely. You dream of someone else living your life, and they're not you. They wear your face, inhabit your relationships, make decisions in your name. And you wake up unsettled, wondering who is really running the show. This disruption can come from trauma, from burnout, from compromise after compromise. But it can also come from external entanglements, energetic interference, past life overlays, ancestral weight. You begin living someone else's emotional blueprint without realizing it. You adopt goals, patterns, even desires that aren't yours. And slowly, your frequency begins to fracture. But here's the most disorienting part. Sometimes the disruption feels like an upgrade. You become more productive, more agreeable, more impressive. But inside, you feel vacant, numb. The life looks good on paper, but the soul doesn't recognize the ink. And the further you go, the harder it becomes to locate the original signal. The soul doesn't scream. It hums. And when the hum disappears, something deep within you begins to wither. But all is not lost, because the soul never leaves. It just waits. Waits for silence. Waits for honesty. Waits for the moment you stop chasing the life that stole your tone and start listening for the note that still belongs to you. You may not remember your exact frequency. That's okay. The dream will remind you. In flashes, in fragments. You'll hear a sound, smell something old, cry without knowing why. And in those moments, your true signature is knocking. Answer softly. Ask, what part of me have I traded for approval? For safety? For survival? Then breathe. Sit. Feel. And when the tone returns, even faintly, follow it. Because when your soul signature realigns, you don't just feel more alive. You feel more you. And in a world of imitation, that's a sacred kind of rebellion. The mapless return theory. You dream of being lost, not in a dramatic, panicked way, just adrift. You're walking through a place that feels almost familiar. You take turns as if you know where you're going, but every hallway leads somewhere unexpected. You open doors that look right, but reveal strangers. You try to retrace your steps, but the landscape shifts beneath your feet. You aren't afraid. You're just searching. This is the mapless return theory. The haunting idea that when the soul reincarnates, it doesn't always come back with a map. It comes back with only a feeling. You wake up from dreams like this with a quiet ache. Not confusion, not fear. Just a sense of unfinished business. You know you've been somewhere, looking for something, someone, but no one ever arrives. You know you've returned. You just don't know where to. Some believe that when we reincarnate, the soul brings memories, lessons, fragments of truth, but not instructions, not coordinates. You arrive into this life carrying longing with no origin, talent with no teacher, wounds with no wounder. And the path forward? Blank. That's the paradox. You remember enough to feel the pull, but not enough to know why. So you walk. You search. You build a life from instincts that don't make sense in context. You long for a partner you haven't met. You gravitate toward skills you've never studied. You find yourself inexplicably drawn to cities, stories, art forms, or people that the world can't explain. But your soul can't ignore. The dream reinforces it. A recurring place. A temple you never reach. A house with rooms that keep rearranging. You aren't trapped. You're trying to return. But the way back isn't marked. Because the truth is, there is no map. Not in the way we want. There's no step-by-step reincarnational guide. No breadcrumb trail neatly scattered across decades. Only signs, symbols, hunches, threads of recognition scattered like stardust across the landscape of your days. This is why some people spend their entire lives chasing what feels like destiny, but never quite lands. Not because they're failing, but because they're remembering through fog, trying to trace a life their body doesn't recall, but their spirit can't forget. And sometimes you find it. A place, a person, a phrase that unlocks something ancient. And for a brief moment, everything aligns. The ache fades. The silence breaks. And you feel it. I'm close. But then the moment passes. The path disappears again. Not out of cruelty, out of design. Because perhaps the point of the mapless return isn't to find the old road. It's to rebuild it. To choose with conscious presence. To walk not where you've been told, but where your soul draws the line as you move. The map doesn't exist before the step. It's written beneath your feet. Dreams remind you of this, not by offering direction, but by highlighting the feeling of being slightly off track. They create tension not to disorient, but to awaken. To say, yes, you've been here before. But no, you've never been here like this. So if you feel like you're living a life slightly out of sync, like you were dropped into the wrong time, or walking toward a reunion that never happens, pause. Don't look for the map. Look for the rhythm, the resonance, the soul-level yes. Because the return isn't marked by roads. It's marked by remembrance. And sometimes the way back home is the way forward into something you must name for the very first time, the shared soul paradox. You meet someone for the first time, and something deep inside you quiets, or stirs, or panics. You've never seen this person before, and yet you know them. Not like a past life memory, not like a soulmate cliché. It's deeper, stranger. Like the two of you are running the same operating system. Like your lives are not just connected, but overlapping. This is the shared soul paradox, the profound, often disorienting experience of meeting another human being who seems to carry a portion of your own soul. It's not romantic. It's not familial. It's not even comfortable. It's recognition, not of who they are, but of who you are when you are near them. You feel your voice shift, your emotions multiply, your dreams deepen. You begin to remember things you didn't live until you realize those weren't mine alone. In the dream space, the paradox intensifies. You become them mid-scene. You watch the same story from both sets of eyes. You feel their heartbreak like your own. You wake up unsure which body you were dreaming in, not because your mind was confused, but because the boundary between you and them was always thinner than you thought. The shared soul. Paradox suggests that reincarnation isn't always singular, that sometimes what we call a soul isn't a whole flame, but a spark from a greater fire, sent down in pieces, placed in multiple bodies across multiple timelines. Fractals, expressions, variants of the same essential consciousness. You and this other are not twins. You are facets. It doesn't mean your lives will be alike. One may suffer while the other thrives. One may awaken while the other sleeps. But when you meet, something aligns. You feel it in the silence between words, the unfinished sentences, the mirrors you don't mean to hold up. And it's not always harmonious. Sometimes, meeting another carrier of your soul triggers rejection. You see in them what you've disowned in yourself. You feel threatened, not by who they are, but by what they force you to remember. Some dreamers report recurring encounters with these soul twins. Sometimes they appear in the same form across lifetimes. Sometimes they shift bodies, names, faces, but the energy is unmistakable. They speak before you do. They finish your thoughts. They remind you of who you are beneath the self you perform. And sometimes they leave. Because shared doesn't mean permanent. Two pieces of the same soul might collide only briefly in one life, to ignite something, to close a loop, to awaken what had gone numb, then vanish, and you're left changed. Not everyone you love is part of your soul. Not everyone you fear isn't. The shared soul. Paradox isn't about comfort. It's about recognition. And once it happens, your sense of identity begins to unravel. You stop thinking of yourself as a fixed point. You start wondering, if this person and I are made of the same soul, then who am I alone? But maybe you were never meant to be alone in that way. Maybe the soul is not an individual flame. Maybe it's a constellation. And sometimes, in sleep or silence or a crowded room, you find one of your own stars staring back at you. And everything, just for a second, makes sense. The infinite loop. Hypothesis. You dream of your own death, not once, but many times. Different bodies, different endings, fire, water, silence. And each time, just as the light fades, it starts again. A cry, a breath, a new beginning. But the arc feels familiar. The story loops. The faces change, but the feeling remains. You wake up with the sense that you're not moving forward through lives. You're circling. Again and again. This is the infinite loop hypothesis. The unnerving possibility that reincarnation isn't a staircase upward, but a circuit, a wheel, a story your soul keeps telling itself without an ending. In ancient traditions, this idea was not unknown. Samsara, the wheel of becoming, birth, death, rebirth, again and again, until something breaks the cycle. But what if the cycle can't be broken? Or worse, what if the breaking was never the point? What if the soul keeps returning? Not because it must, not even because it chooses, but because it has no other frame of reference? The dream keeps offering clues. You meet people who look different each time, but act the same. You make the same mistake in different settings. You chase freedom, but the corridors always turn back on themselves. You find a door that seems new, only to realize it leads back to the place you started. And then, one night, you dream of a life you've already lived. Exactly. Word for word. Moment for moment. And you know it. Not just like a memory, but like a script you've memorized through performance. That's when the hypothesis begins to haunt you. What if I've lived this exact life before? Not metaphorically, literally. Same choices, same people, same thoughts, in the same order. Not because you're fated to, but because the loop requires it to maintain its integrity. And if that's true, is free will real? Is growth even possible? Or are you simply playing the role of growth to keep the illusion intact? It's tempting to resist this idea, to rebel, to prove the loop wrong. You change something big. You walk away from a path you once followed, and for a moment, it feels like you broke the cycle. But then the loop adapts. It incorporates your rebellion. It makes the deviation part of the script, like a program designed to adjust, to self-heal, to make even the glitch part of the flow. This is the dark genius of the loop. It doesn't trap you through force. It traps you through familiarity. The longer you circle, the more every choice begins to feel recycled. Every love, every grief, a variation on a theme. You start to wonder if your soul even knows what a linear story feels like, or if it's just spinning, hoping that this time it will mean something different. But maybe the loop isn't an enemy. Maybe it's a mirror. Maybe it keeps repeating because you haven't seen yourself clearly yet. Because until you do, the story has no reason to end. In dreams, sometimes, the loop opens. Not by breaking, but by becoming visible. You see the pattern. You see the way the same lesson keeps dressing in new clothes. And in that moment, you have a choice. Not to escape, but to witness. To meet the loop, not with resistance, but with awareness. And awareness is what the loop cannot digest. When you become truly conscious within the cycle, you stop being a character in the story. You become the reader, the observer, the presence behind the pattern. And then, only then, does something truly shift. Not because the loop ends, but because, finally, you do not confuse it for who you are. The dream-born identity. You have a recurring dream, but it's not like the others. You're not reliving a memory. You're not reenacting a story. You're becoming someone else, but not someone from your past, someone entirely new. They have a name, a way of speaking, a signature walk. And what's strange is how consistent they are. Night after night, you return to them, their world, their problems, their voice, until slowly you begin to ask, is this a dream I'm having, or a person I'm becoming? This is the dream-born identity, the phenomenon where a fully formed self begins to emerge not in waking life, but in the landscape of your dreams. They are not a mask, not a metaphor. They are real, in the way that dreams can be real. Vivid, emotionally coherent, hauntingly whole. And perhaps they are you. But not the you that walks through daylight. They're the version of you that never made it out of the dream space. A soul thread that splintered off. An identity nurtured in sleep, growing life after life behind the veil of waking memory. In the beginning, you write them off. Just a character. But over time, their presence deepens. You find yourself thinking their thoughts during the day. Their moods color yours. You miss people from their world. You feel homesick for cities you've never seen. You're not just dreaming. You're remembering another version of you who only exists when the eyes close. And then it gets stranger. You might walk past a mirror and expect to see their face. You speak a sentence aloud and realize that wasn't your cadence. You feel anger, grief, hunger that doesn't belong to your life story, but burns like it came from your own body. And the boundary between selves begins to dissolve. So, what is this identity? Is it a past life? A future self? A soul from another dimension borrowing your vessel? Or is it simply a dream grown too powerful to forget? Some mystics suggest that dream identities are not echoes of other lives, but anchors, points of soul exploration branching outward in sleep, testing versions of being, creating stories in parallel to your waking one. Most of these dissolve with the morning light, but some stay, some mature, some become you, in ways you have never asked for, but can't undo. The dream-born identity challenges everything we believe about selfhood. It says, maybe you are not the dreamer. Maybe you are the dream. Or perhaps you are both, the dreamer and the dreamt, switching roles each night, never quite remembering who wrote which part. And there's a risk. You may start to prefer their world. You may long for their story more than your own. And slowly, waking life begins to feel like the dream. That's the moment to pause, to remember. The dream-born self isn't here to replace you. They are here to complete you, to show you the parts of yourself that can only emerge when logic is asleep, when boundaries are thin, when the soul is allowed to write in its native tongue, imagery, instinct, and story. So if you've built a second life in the dream world, if a name whispers itself to you at night, if a face greets you with silent recognition, if a voice inside says, "Don't forget who we are when we sleep," listen. That version of you is not a ghost, not fiction, not madness. They are a self born of the night, and sometimes the most important parts of you never wake up at all. The nested lives illusion. You wake from a dream and sigh with relief, only to realize you're still dreaming. The world looks real, feels real, but something is off. You try to speak, but your voice sounds distant. You open a door, and the hallway leads somewhere unfamiliar. Again, you wake, this time in your bed. But the alarm clock blinks the wrong time. The sky outside is the wrong color. And suddenly, a question rises in your chest like static. How many layers deep am I? This is the nested lives illusion, the eerie phenomenon where dreams contain lives within lives, each one feeling complete, each one convincing you this is the real one, until another curtain lifts. It isn't just false awakening. It's false identity. A sequence of selves stacked like Russian dolls, each one wrapped around a deeper version of you. You may dream that you're a different person. You have a job, a family, a story, and then you die in the dream, or fall asleep, and wake up in another life, a different one, sometimes entirely unrelated. But the transition doesn't feel abrupt. It feels intentional, like you've dropped into another layer, peeling back one identity only to wear another. Some people experience an entire lifetime in a single dream. They grow old, love, lose, learn, and just before death, they awaken, only to discover that was one layer of many. And the emotional residue lingers. You miss people who never existed. You carry grief from a life that never happened. But the ache is real. The nested lives illusion challenges our deepest assumption, that we are only ever one person at a time. But what if the soul is more complex? What if dreams reveal not just who we've been, but how many versions of us can exist simultaneously? What if some of these dream lives aren't past lives or fantasies, but coexisting selves, running in tandem, each unaware of the others except in sleep? The illusion, then, is not that you're dreaming, but that you think waking is the top layer. What if it isn't? What if your current life is just another room in the mansion of the soul? And each dream is a doorway, not into fiction, but into another chamber of being, just as vivid, just as real, but inaccessible to your daytime mind. Nested dreams sometimes appear recursive. You wake, only to watch yourself fall asleep again. You meet a version of yourself who remembers things you've never lived. You pass someone on the street, and feel an instant, overwhelming familiarity, not from this life, but from one of the layers beneath. These experiences unsettle us not because they're bizarre, but because they threaten the illusion of singular identity. They suggest that the self we defend and define so carefully is just one of many. A mask worn briefly. A page in a much thicker book. The dream doesn't explain. It doesn't hand you a map. It simply lets you feel it. Layer by layer, letting each one fall away until you reach a core, not of clarity, but of silence. A space where no story holds, because all stories have already been lived. And when you wake, really wake, you feel it. The weight of all those lives pressing softly behind your eyes. The question you can't shake. Which layer am I in now? And deeper still, does it matter? Because maybe the point isn't to find the real life. Maybe it's to realize that reality itself is a spiral. And the soul, vast and quiet, is dreaming through all of it, again and again. The free will mirage. You dream of making choices, turning left instead of right, speaking instead of staying silent, walking away from someone who once held your entire world. In the dream, you feel powerful, intentional. You decide, you move, you act. But then something shifts. The scene resets. The same moment plays again. This time, you make a different choice. But the result is the same, or worse. And a question forms like a crack in glass. Was any of that really my choice? This is the free will mirage, the unsettling sensation that what feels like agency might, at some deeper level, be illusion. That the choices you believe define your path may already be part of a design so vast, so recursive, that even your rebellion has been written in. In dreams, this comes forward like a trick. You try to change the outcome. You go back through the door, speak the line differently, embrace the person you once rejected. And yet the end repeats. The love still leaves. The building still burns. You wake with an ache in your bones, not from loss, but from the sense that you were never steering the wheel. It's not just in dreams. You feel it in waking life, too. The sense that you were always going to end up in this job, meet that person, carry this wound, that even your most spontaneous, bold, or rebellious acts feel inevitable, as if they didn't arise from choice, but from programming. Some philosophies embrace this, determinism dressed in spiritual cloth. They say your soul, before incarnation, chooses every major arc, the people you'll meet, the challenges you'll face, even the endings. Free will, they suggest, is local, confined to how you respond, not what you receive. But the free will mirage cuts deeper. It doesn't just question whether you chose your life. It questions whether you're choosing anything at all. You may dream of observing yourself, watching a version of you make a decision that feels out of character, yet completely logical. You scream at them to stop, to turn. But they don't. Because that's not your role. You're not the driver. You're the witness. And something about that feels horrifying and oddly peaceful. The mirage isn't here to take away your power. It's here to strip the illusion around it. Because maybe your choices aren't as free as you believe, not because you're being manipulated, but because you're still living from unconscious loops, inherited wounds, invisible fears, repetitive karma, traumas that whisper, don't trust, don't rest, don't rise. And so you obey, thinking you are choosing. The dream reveals the cage, not by locking you in, but by showing you the moment you almost escaped, almost chose differently, almost saw the pattern, but turned back just as you always have. And that is where the mirage begins to dissolve. Not in fantasy, not in control, but in awareness. Because even if the script is written, you can become the reader. Even if the soul pre-selected the stage, you can still improvise the tone. And sometimes that tiny shift of how you choose, not what you choose, is enough to change the entire rhythm of a life. So the next time you dream of decisions that feel like déjà vu, ask not whether you had free will. Ask, was I awake enough to use it differently? Because freedom isn't in the choices you make. It's in the consciousness you bring to them, the soul overcrowding effect. You wake from a dream, and for a few moments, you're not sure who you are. You remember multiple names. You feel the echoes of different lives, not just one dream narrative, but layers, shifting identities, fragments of other selves speaking all at once. You sit up in the dark and whisper, too many. This is the soul overcrowding effect, the disorienting phenomenon where multiple past lives, unresolved versions of you, and perhaps even energies, not entirely yours, seem to inhabit the same psychic space at once. It doesn't feel like possession. It's not dramatic. It's subtle, heavy, like your soul is a house with too many rooms open, and all the doors are creaking at once. You feel sadness and can't trace its source. You act out of character and wonder if that character ever belonged to you in the first place. Some dreams don't tell stories. They feel like gatherings. You're hosting a crowd of selves. One is grieving. Another is angry. One watches from a corner without speaking. You look down, and your hands keep changing. Child, elder, stranger. In the dream, you move through them all, not as one person, but as many, simultaneous, fractured, alive. The waking mind tries to flatten it, just a weird dream, but something stays. You feel full, not satisfied, but crowded. You carry moods that don't fit your life, memories that don't belong to any single narrative, and an exhaustion that no sleep can cure. The soul overcrowding effect raises uncomfortable questions. How many unfinished versions of you are still active? How many choices, avoided, abandoned, half-answered, are still echoing across your energetic field? What if reincarnation isn't a clean sequence, but a messy convergence? The linear soul story is comforting. One life after another, neatly stacked. But dreams suggest otherwise. They imply overlap, compression, like souls in different timelines pressing against each other, blurring identity. What if reincarnation is more like overlapping transparency sheets, with only your current body anchoring a focus point? In this crowd of selves, some are loud, some whisper, some don't even know you're there. And the longer they remain unacknowledged, the more you feel pulled in conflicting directions. You want one thing and act on another. You commit then withdraw. You speak truths that feel old, as if inherited from a version of you who's still waiting for resolution. This isn't pathology. It's inheritance. The soul doesn't forget. It collects. And when the vessel gets too full, the weight shows up in dreams, not as metaphor, but as signal, a call to reconcile, to release, or at least to listen. Some traditions speak of soul fragmentation. Others describe karmic clutter. Either way, the solution isn't erasure. It's integration. You begin by noticing. Which voices keep speaking through me? Which wounds don't match my story, but still shape my choices? And in dreams, you can meet them, not to push them away, but to ask, what do you need? Sometimes, one version of you just needs to be seen, to be heard saying, I tried, or I failed, or I loved and lost, and never got to speak of it. With time, the crowd quiets, not because they're gone, but because they've been welcomed back into wholeness. So, if you wake up feeling like more than one person, like a chorus rather than a solo, don't panic. You're not broken. You're converging. And when the soul gets too loud, it isn't asking to be emptied. It's asking to be witnessed, the rebirth identity. Trap. You're born again. You don't remember choosing it, but you're here, breathing, growing, becoming someone new. And yet, somewhere beneath the surface of this fresh identity, there's a tension, a subtle resistance, like your soul hasn't quite settled into the shape it's been assigned. You look in the mirror and wonder, who am I now? And how much of that is really me? This is the rebirth identity. The strange inner conflict that arises when the soul reincarnates into a life that doesn't align with who it once was, yet is forced to adapt, to conform, to become someone else entirely. In the early years, the tension is invisible. You learn the rules. You absorb the language, the culture, the gender, the roles, and with each layer added, the soul beneath goes quieter, not erased, but overwritten. And by the time you can speak, you've already begun forgetting. But then the dreams begin. You dream of being someone else. A farmer, a mother, a warrior, a monk. You speak with ease in a language you've never learned. You ache for landscapes you've never seen. You feel pulled toward choices your current life has no place for. And when you wake, you feel miscast, like an actor who showed up for the wrong role. That's the trap. Because the new life demands full presence, full immersion. But the soul still echoes, still hums with the memory of a previous existence, and it creates friction. You may not remember the past life in full, but you remember being different. And now, you're someone else, expected to play a part that never quite fits. This inner dissonance shows up in countless ways. Identity confusion, discomfort in your own name, a quiet rejection of cultural expectations, feeling older than your age, feeling foreign in your own body. These aren't neuroses, they're leaks. The soul bleeding through the new identity, saying, this isn't the whole of me. And yet, you can't go back. So the soul does what it must. It adapts, bends, performs, learns to survive in a costume that feels tight around the heart. And that performance becomes so seamless, Even you forget it's a mask. Until something breaks. A crisis. A heartbreak. A dream too vivid to dismiss. And suddenly, the persona cracks. The identity falters. You see yourself clearly for a moment, not as the person you've built, but as the presence that has persisted across lives. And you realize you are not this body. Not entirely. You are something older, wider. But here's the paradox. The trap is not in being reborn. It's in believing the identity is all you are. The moment you cling to the label, the role, the narrative as absolute truth, the soul begins to shrink. Not in power, but in access. Some never escape the trap. They die confused, misaligned, having lived a life that was well-behaved, but deeply unlived. Others awaken, not by erasing the new identity, but by expanding beyond it. They begin to say, "This is who I am now, but not all I have ever been." And something unlocks. You may never remember the full story of your previous life. You don't have to. What matters is the whisper beneath the roles you play, the sense that you were someone else, and that someone still walks with you. So when you feel out of place, not because of anxiety, but because of a deeper dissonance, pause. Ask yourself, am I living a story that truly fits the shape of my soul? And if the answer is no, don't panic. That realization is not a breakdown. It's a breakthrough. Because escaping the rebirth identity trap doesn't require remembering your past life. It only requires remembering that this one isn't the only truth you carry. The forgotten voice. Glitch. You're in a dream, speaking. Words so shy leave your mouth, but they don't sound like your voice. They're too low, too high, too calm, too strange. Or maybe they sound right, but wrong inside, like you're mimicking yourself. You keep talking, but something's missing. A sensation, a frequency. You wake up, and for a moment, you hesitate to speak, as if your own voice might not return as you left it. This is the forgotten voice. Glitch. A subtle, haunting phenomenon where your dream self reveals just how far you've drifted from your soul's native tone. You may not notice it at first. The voice in the dream changes just slightly. A different accent, a slower rhythm, a tendency to say what your waking self never dares to. And it's not just sound. It's intention. In the dream, your words carry a different weight. They land. They mean. You speak truth without hesitation. You ask for what you need. You say no without guilt. And then you wake and realize, I used to speak like that. The forgotten voice. Glitch doesn't only happen in sleep. It shows up when you hear a recording of yourself and don't recognize the person speaking. Or when someone repeats something you said, and it sounds hollow, like it came from a script. Or worse, when you try to speak your truth and realize you don't even know what it sounds like anymore. This glitch isn't about sound. It's about disconnection. Somewhere along the line, your voice stopped belonging entirely to you. It became a tool, a mask, a negotiation. You learned to say what wouldn't upset others. You learned to soften truth into suggestion. You learned silence when silence was safer. And bit by bit, the soul's native frequency faded. In dreams, the glitch becomes visible. You may find yourself in a crowd trying to scream, but nothing comes out. Or you speak and people look through you. Or worse, your words pour out, but they belong to someone else. You're speaking as a parent, as a boss, as a child desperate to be understood. You play roles so deeply ingrained, you forgot they weren't yours to begin with. But then, once in a while, the voice returns. A dream version of you walks through a fire and speaks one sentence with absolute clarity. A single phrase, resonant and true, shakes the walls. You wake up and remember the feeling, not just of power, but of presence. You felt yourself in your own voice again, whole, aligned, real. The glitch fades with awareness. It heals when you stop rehearsing your identity and start inhabiting it. When you say what your soul has been whispering for years, even if it trembles. When you stop explaining your feelings like a lawyer and start speaking them like a poet. When you allow your tone to reflect your inner world, not the expectations of those listening. Because your true voice doesn't ask for permission. It doesn't apologize for existing. It doesn't shape itself to be digestible. It just arrives, clear, strange, undeniable. So if you've forgotten how you sound when you're honest, listen to your dreams. They remember. They remember the voice that lived before the masks, before the compromise, before the silence. And they'll keep glitching through until you speak like someone who remembers what it feels like to mean every word. The wrong era. Paradox. You wake up and everything is in place. Your room, your body, the year printed on your phone screen. But something feels wrong. Not tragic, not urgent, just misaligned, like a soft ache behind the ribs. You go about your day, but there's a whisper behind your thoughts. I don't belong to this time. You find yourself drawn to centuries you've never touched. You long for music that predates you. You grieve the loss of rituals you were never taught. This is the wrong era paradox. The eerie sense that your soul was born into a timeline it was never meant to inhabit. It starts small. You feel more alive in antique stores than shopping malls. You look at old black and white photos and feel the itch of memory, not from history books, but from inside. You hear a dialect, and something in your tongue stirs. You read letters from another century and weep, as if the ink was yours. You can't explain it, but you don't need to. The paradox isn't intellectual, it's somatic. Your body reacts before your thoughts do. In dreams, it becomes vivid. You live entire lives in eras long gone. You speak languages you've never learned. You navigate cities that no longer exist. You wake with dirt from another century in your hands, or so it feels. And for a few hours after, this world seems pale in comparison, like a copy of a place you actually lived. This paradox doesn't come from boredom with modern life. It's deeper. It's existential. The clothes don't fit. The sounds don't soothe. The pace exhausts. You try to love the era you're in, but the love feels performative. Because something inside keeps looking back, not out of nostalgia, but out of recognition. But why would the soul end up in the wrong time? Some suggest it's not wrong. It's interrupted. You were meant for another age, but something rerouted you. A karmic contract. A soul you agreed to follow. A ripple in time that needed healing. And your presence here, misplaced as it feels, was part of the response. Others say it's on purpose, that being born in the wrong time is a kind of spiritual challenge, a test of adaptation, of memory, of patience. The soul remembers a time of alignment, of resonance, and now must learn to carry that inner knowing into a world that no longer mirrors it. But the hardest part isn't the longing. It's the invisibility, because no one else sees it. You speak of old traditions and get polite nods. You play the music of your heart, and the room goes quiet. You mention a past life, and the conversation moves on. You're not just out of place. You're alone in your remembering. And yet, in dreams, others sometimes find you. You meet companions who speak the same old truths. You walk roads that feel familiar beneath unfamiliar moons. And something in you lifts, not because you've escaped your era, but because, briefly, you weren't the only one who remembered. That's the gift hidden in the paradox. You may never belong to this era, but your presence here makes it deeper. You carry forgotten frequencies. You speak languages no longer spoken, but still felt. You are a bridge, not between past and present, but between soul memory and soul amnesia, between what was sacred and what could be again. So if the world feels too loud, too fast, too hollow, pause. Close your eyes. Let the dream return, not to escape the era you're in, but to remind it that something older still breathes here, through you. The mirror personality effect. You meet someone, and instantly, without reason, you react. Maybe you dislike them. Maybe you admire them. Maybe they make your skin crawl or your heart race. But as the days pass, you begin to see something odd. The traits that spark such a strong reaction are yours. Their confidence mirrors your hidden arrogance. Their hesitation reflects your own quiet doubt. Their kindness feels familiar. Their rage feels like a memory. This is the mirror personality effect, the uncanny phenomenon where the people who impact us most across lifetimes and dreams are often reflecting ourselves back to us in the clearest and most uncomfortable ways. In dreams, this effect is magnified. You might argue with someone who looks nothing like you, but you say the same words at the same time. You're in conflict, but you feel the fight pulling from within, not between. Or you fall in love with a person who feels uncannily synchronized to your internal rhythm. And when they speak, it's as if your soul is answering itself. These aren't just symbols. They're mirrors. Not metaphorical, but energetic. You've met them before. Maybe not in this life. Maybe not in any one specific timeline. But the resonance is unmistakable. In some dreams, the other character becomes you mid-scene. You speak from their mouth. You move in their body. And you wake, disoriented. Not from the shift, but from the recognition. That was me. The mirror personality effect suggests that reincarnation may not only be about moving through different lives, but through versions of yourself that you refused to fully meet. And sometimes, those versions appear as other people, not to confuse you, but to show you what still needs to be claimed. The ones who bother you most might be reflecting the parts you abandoned, the ambition you buried, the selfishness you won't admit, the vulnerability you locked away. And the ones you admire? They might be versions of you you're still growing into, unclaimed strengths, dormant courage. And here's the twist. These mirrors don't stop at waking life. They follow you into dreams. Your subconscious doesn't waste time with strangers. It populates your dreamscape with reflections of unresolved dynamics, of hidden selves, of echoes from lives where you and this other were one. You may dream of someone you hate, only to see yourself through their eyes. You may embrace someone who changes form mid-dream, revealing the younger you, the older you, the other you. And in that moment, the divide collapses. You're not dreaming of another. You're reuniting with a piece of yourself. But beware, these mirrors can distort too. Sometimes what you see is exaggerated, amplified. It's not meant to mislead you. It's meant to amplify what you're resisting. So if someone in your dream feels too intense, too cruel, too tender, too wise, ask not who they are. Ask, what part of me are they reflecting? Because the dream isn't showing you who to fight or follow. It's showing you who you are becoming. And when you wake from one of those dreams, rattled, moved, disturbed, don't chase the other figure. Don't overanalyze their face. Instead, turn inward. Hold the mirror still and say, I see you. Because the soul is not singular. It is a room of mirrors, and every person you meet, awake or asleep, might just be another version of you, trying to come home. The alien soul invasion. You dream of being surrounded by people you know, but something's off. Their eyes don't carry memory. Their voices are hollow. Their gestures slightly delayed, like actors in a role they haven't rehearsed. You try to speak, and the words feel unfamiliar in your own mouth. You look down at your hands and feel estranged from your body. The world looks like yours, but behind the scenes, something has shifted. This is the alien soul invasion, a chilling theory that not all souls incarnated here are from this world, or even from the same universal thread. We grow up assuming everyone around us is like us, that we're all spinning through lifetimes in the same cycle, earthborn, earthbound, evolving in tandem. But sometimes you meet someone, or are someone, who doesn't fit that story. You feel it, not in belief, in vibration, like they are running on a different frequency, like their soul didn't rise from this soil. Dreams begin to reflect this divide. You may see a version of yourself that doesn't breathe air, that doesn't walk, but hovers, that looks human, but doesn't feel human. Or you may encounter others, cold, watchful, curious, distant. They speak a language of precision, not emotion. They observe life like it's an experiment. And somehow, they are new here, not new in age, new in origin. These are what some traditions describe as foreign incarnates, souls who did not evolve through Earth's karmic loops, but entered from elsewhere, from other systems, other realities, some to assist, some to learn, some simply to experience the weight and density of being human for the first time. And when they arrive, they bring disruption. Not because they're evil, but because they don't carry the same resonance, the same collective memory. Their presence changes the emotional temperature of a room. They speak truth like formula. They love differently, curious, detached, or with overwhelming intensity. Their dreams are filled with architecture not built by human hands. Their sense of home is missing. You may be one of them. You may wake each day feeling like an intruder in your own life. Like the gravity here is too much. The language too blunt. The emotions too fast. You may have spent your childhood asking questions that made adults nervous. Not because you were precocious, but because your baseline perspective was never rooted in this timeline. The alien soul invasion isn't an attack. It's a collision of evolution. And it creates friction, resistance, misunderstanding. Not just between people, but within the self. Because these souls often forget where they came from. Reincarnation wipes memory, but not essence. And so they carry within them an ancient loneliness, a sense of being far from where they belong. Dreams are the only place where they sometimes remember. They dream of skies that pulse with strange colors, of civilizations that communicate in patterns, not words, of love that moves like shared light, not emotion. And when they wake, they weep, not from fear, but from homesickness they cannot name. And still, they are here. The invasion has already happened, but maybe it's not invasion at all. Maybe it's integration. Maybe Earth called these souls because its evolution needed an outside spark, a shift in the field, a frequency that would shake the old loops loose. So if you feel alien in this life, if your dreams take you far beyond stars, if your emotions don't match the people around you, if you look at the world and silently wonder, why does this feel so small? Know this: you're not broken. You're not lost. You just came from farther away than most. And Earth is still learning how to hold you. The reincarnation exit. Lie. You have the dream again. This time, you're leaving. You're done. The cycle is over. A guide, a voice, a presence tells you, you've completed what you came to do. You feel the relief, the soft unraveling of tension that's been with you for lifetimes. You prepare to ascend, to dissolve, to disappear. But just as the dream begins to fade, there's a shift. A small detail changes. A phrase echoes back with new meaning. And suddenly, you realize you've been told this before. You didn't leave last time. You were recycled, rerouted, sent back. And you wake with a single chilling thought. What if I'm never getting out? This is the reincarnation exit lie. The idea that the soul is promised release, closure, or graduation from the reincarnation cycle, only to be sent back again and again under illusions of choice, unfinished business, or higher purpose. Not as punishment, but as part of a deeper, more disquieting system of spiritual inertia. In theory, reincarnation is about growth. The soul chooses to return, learns, evolves, moves closer to unity, enlightenment, or home. But what if beneath that story lies a loop so old, so intricate, that even your awareness of it is part of the trap? Dreams start to reflect this suspicion. You reach the end of a symbolic journey, cross a bridge, board a ship, pass through a portal. And just as peace arrives, you're pulled back. Reset. Your feet touch earth again. Your name returns. You wake up in a hospital bed, or a cradle, or a city you've never seen, but feel bound to. The journey didn't end. It rebooted. Sometimes the lie is sweet. You're told you volunteered, that you chose to return to help others, to serve, to heal. And maybe you did. But then the dreams start carrying a tension, like a contract signed in a language you don't fully understand. A duty that no longer resonates. A cycle that feels more like obligation than evolution. And the worst part? You question your own questioning. Am I resisting growth? Am I being ungrateful? Am I arrogant for wanting to leave? The lie feeds on your doubt. Because the more you question your own readiness to exit, the more justification the system has to keep you circling. But what if the system isn't malicious? What if it's just self-sustaining? What if the soul gets stuck, not because of evil, but because of momentum? Because rebirth became habit, and habit became doctrine, and doctrine became reality. Some dreamers report glimpses beyond the system, moments when they saw through the grid, when the dream paused, frozen mid-scene, and they heard a voice, not in words, but in knowing. You are allowed to leave, but only if you truly believe you can. And therein lies the paradox. The exit is real, but so is the lie. Both exist simultaneously, and only a soul deeply, fearlessly conscious of itself can tell the difference. So what do? You start here. You question, not with bitterness, with clarity. You stop asking what lesson you've missed. You start asking who keeps writing the curriculum. You stop assuming suffering means progress. You stop assuming return means virtue. You sit with the possibility, both terrifying and liberating, that you don't have to come back. Not next time, not ever. And maybe, just maybe, that awareness is the key the system hopes you'll never find. The ancestral soul merge. You have a dream, not of being someone else, but of being many people at once. A grandmother's eyes behind your own, a voice you've never used whispering prayers through your lips. You wake with aches in your joints that don't belong to you, emotions that feel inherited, not experienced. You're not just remembering your lineage, you're carrying it. This is the ancestral soul merge, the mysterious intertwining of reincarnation and bloodline, where your soul's path crosses, blends, and sometimes fuses with the spirits of those who came before you. We're taught to think of past lives and ancestry as separate threads, one tied to the soul, the other to the body. But what if they aren't parallel? What if they braid? What if you're not only reincarnating across timelines, but also within your own lineage? In many cultures, this idea isn't new. The ancestor who returns in the form of a newborn. The child who carries their great-grandmother's temper, walk, laugh. But the soul merge goes deeper. It's not just resemblance, it's convergence. At some point, the soul stops being entirely singular. It returns not as a stranger to the family line, but as a branch of its own root system. And you feel it in dreams. You might dream you're back in your childhood home, but it's not yours. It's your mother's childhood, or her mother's. You see events you never lived. You hold objects you never touched. But the grief, the fear, the choice, it feels like yours. You're not just dreaming for your ancestors. You're dreaming as them. And waking up with echoes you can't explain. Sometimes it shows up in waking life, too. A deep connection to family traditions you were never taught. A sudden urge to break a pattern of suffering that seems older than you. A resistance to becoming like someone in your bloodline, only to realize you already carry their rhythm, their pain, their unfinished story. The soul merge isn't possession. It's integration. It's the soul recognizing that the body it now inhabits was shaped by a lineage of decisions, traumas, longings, and stepping in not just to live its life, but to weave those threads into resolution. But here's the paradox. When you carry more than one soul fragment, the self begins to blur. You may wonder, which parts of me are mine? Which emotions are inherited? Which choices are truly free? And the dream doesn't answer. It simply mirrors. You see a version of yourself you don't recognize until they cry, and you feel the tears in your own chest. Healing, then, becomes a collective act. You break the cycle not just for yourself, but for the ancestors still living through you. You learn to forgive not just what was done to you, but what you once did, generations ago. Because maybe your soul and your great-grandfathers were never that far apart to begin with. Some believe this merge happens by design, that certain souls choose to reincarnate along a particular bloodline again and again to untangle what got stuck. Others believe it's the ancestors calling you back, asking, "Can you carry what we couldn't? Can you finish the story we abandoned?" And if you're reading this, maybe the answer is yes. So when the grief hits and it doesn't feel personal, when the joy feels deeper than your own victories, when your dreams echo with voices that don't belong to any character you've ever played, pause. You're not being haunted. You're being braided. This isn't just your life. It's a convergence, a returning, a soul remembering its roots, and finally, learning how to bloom through them.